Sabrina, how many times do I have to tell you? No one wants your dad to make balloon animals at our Christmas party. Adrian tried not to wince at Chloe's piercing shouts. She was going to blow out his eardrums one day. He was surprised she hadn't already. Despite being class representative, Marinette had put Chloe in charge of planning the class's Christmas party, and the power had all gone to her head. Adrian had wished Marinette would be the one to do it, but he understood all too well why she couldn't. And it's not like she hadn't helped at all. They'd all stayed after hours at school last week to decorate the classroom, and now there were multicoloured fairy lights strung up around the door, above the board and lining the front of everyone's desk, creating a pretty rainbow glow, even in the daylight. Rose had found a miniature Christmas tree too, and it sat on Miss Boustier's desk, tiny baubles hanging off the branches. It wasn't as elaborate as the tree they had at home, but it made the classroom where Adrian already felt so safe even cosier. Tears filled Sabrina's eyes, and as soon as she saw them, Miss Boustier got up from where she was leaning against the front desk and went over to Chloe and Sabrina's seats. Well, that's okay. I think balloon animals might not be the best option either. Not very Christmas related, is it? She asked, and Sabrina sniffed, nodded, and Adrian relaxed. He didn't fancy stopping an Akuma attack right now, especially if Sabrina was turned into Miraculous again. What do you think then? Sabrina asked with a small smile. What about Secret Santa, their teacher suggested? Oh, we played that at my old school, Alias said. Let's do that. The rest of the class all shouted out their affirmation, the classroom coming back to life after a possible near-akumatization. But Adrian just glanced around in confusion. Julek and Rose were already talking about what gifts they would buy, and Markov was calculating which name would be the most likely for each person to pull. Adrian didn't understand in the slightest. Miss Boustier, he asked, cutting through the chatter. What's Secret Santa? Dude, you don't know what Secret Santa is? Nino asked from beside him. Well, he obviously wouldn't, Alex said from across the room. I doubt Mr. Agrest did it with him, and you can't really play it with two people. It's really simple, Milan said. We all put our names in a hat, and then we all pick one, and whoever you get, you have to buy them a present. But you don't tell them, because Secret Santa. Adrian nodded. That seems straightforward enough. Are we all in agreement then, Miss Boustier asked, and the whole class nodded. Do you think Marinette will like it too? The aforementioned girl had yet to show up today, but to be fair, class hadn't actually started yet, and there had been an Akuma fight last night too. It was no wonder she was tired. Adrian just hoped she was okay. He smiled as he thought about her. His lady was amazing. It was just a shame she didn't know that he knew that yet. Miss Boustier went back to her desk, and once she'd quickly written all of their names down on a piece of paper, she cut them up and then folded them in half so the name couldn't be seen from the outside. Can I have your hat, please, Nino? He groaned. Miss, I can't. I don't look good without it. Alia laughed. Yes, you do. Now give it to her. Nino sighed, but then handed his hat over. Miss Boustier put all the paper slips inside, then went over to Adrian to let him pick first. Shouldn't we wait for Marinette, he asked. We don't need to include her, Lila said, and even though he didn't turn around, Adrian could hear that she was smiling despite wanting to exclude Marinette. I'm sure she'll be okay with it. Adrian clenched his jaw. I don't think she will be. At all. Don't worry, I put her name in, Miss Boustier said to him, ignoring Lila for now. Marinette can have whatever name is left in the hat. I'll keep it safe for her for when she arrives. Satisfied with that answer, Adrian picked a name, but tucked it into his pocket for now. He wasn't sure how secret this had to be kept, but he didn't want anyone to see. He'd look at it later. Miss Boustier went around the room with a hat, some of his classmates smiling when they opened the paper they picked, others, including Lila, pulling a face. Just as their teacher started to walk back to her desk, one piece of paper left in the hat, Marinette finally walked in the room. She looked a little sleepy, but Adrian always thought she looked cute with her hair rumpled from just having woken up. And today was no exception, even though she had a pink scarf wrapped haphazardly around her neck, cute nose a little red from the cold. He could feel his heartbeat flutter against his ribs at the sight of her, and teemed with the relief of knowing she was okay after last night's Akuma fight, he smiled at her. She blushed a little, then smiled back, and then finally registered that Miss Boustier was holding Nino's hat. What's going on? Marinette asked. I didn't think I was late yet. The teacher chuckled. You're not. I was just helping Chloe and Sabrina finalise the plans for the Christmas party tomorrow. We've decided to play Secret Santa. It's a little last minute, but I know we can all pull a little something together before tomorrow. Will you have time? Marinette nodded, although she wasn't sure if she would. It all depended on what Shadow Moth's Christmas plans were. The man never took a break. Didn't he have a family? Here you go. Miss Boustier offered Nino's upturned hat towards her, and Marinette took the final slip of paper from inside. She unfolded it and then quickly snapped it shut. There was no way. She was too sleep-deprived for that to be true. She blinked a couple of times, then opened the paper. It hadn't changed. Written on the slip was his name, clear in their teacher's handwriting. Adrian Agreste. Are you okay, Marinette? The aforementioned boy asked, and she squeaked, folding the paper back up again. Yeah, sorry, just tired. Adrian smiled at her again. It's okay. Just make sure you're getting enough rest. Do you need me to help you to your seat? She felt her cheeks heat up even more. No, it's okay. I got it. Thank you, though. With one last smile from Adrian, Marinette went to sit down, and Alia turned to her with a smirk. You're so cute. We're not together, Marinette whispered, hoping Adrian couldn't hear. So? That doesn't stop you from being cute. And he defended you before you came in. Lila didn't want you to play Secret Santa. Instead of rolling her eyes about Lila's behaviour, Marinette smiled as she found herself blushing again. Of course Adrian would do that. She shouldn't have been surprised, but it always warmed her heart to know he cared enough about her to come to her defence. A few months ago, during the first Style Queen Award, he'd even risked his identity in order to protect her. They were stuck in the elevator together, and Marinette had expected it to be awkward, but it had been anything but. They started off nestled in the corners on either side of the doors, but then Adrian had registered the worried look on her face. She looked like that because she needed to transform, like 5 minutes ago, but couldn't because she wasn't alone. But Adrian didn't know that, and he shuffled across the metal floor to her in concern. Are you okay, Marinette? He asked, brow furrowed. Yeah, I just want to get out. Not that I hate being in here with you, she quickly added, realising how that could be interpreted, and then she groaned when she realised how the way she covered it up could also be interpreted. I'm sorry, I'm just worried because there's an Akuma villain and I hope everyone will be okay out there and if we can even get out, and I just... Her rambling trailed off when Adrian took her hand in his. It's okay. I'm sure they'll all be fine, even though we're safe in here. It's nice you're so worried about them all. You were the right choice for class representative. He squeezed her hand then, and she blushed, her eyes fixed on where they were touching. I hardly do anything. What are you talking about? You're there for everyone, even Chloe, and even for people not in our class, like Zoe and Mark. And even though there are loads of things you have to do outside of school, you still find time for everyone. I was right. You're our everyday Ladybug. Marinette could feel her heartbeat speed up and her blush deepen. Thank you. What? No kiss this time? She suddenly looked up at him, surprised he'd said that, but couldn't help but laugh when she saw the smirk on his face. He didn't usually talk like that, or pull a facial expression like that either, but somehow it suited him. It vaguely reminded her of someone else, but she couldn't put her finger on who. Either way, it made her happy to think that Adrian was comfortable enough around her to say something like that. As far as she was aware, he didn't act like that with anyone else. Maybe she should take a chance and be brave too. Would you like one? She asked, mirroring his smirk. She didn't usually talk like this around Adrian either. The only boy she would say something like that to was Cat Noir. The smirk vanished off his face and Marinette smiled. He hadn't been expecting her to say that, had he? Only if you want to, he said, looking a little shy now. But even so, Marinette leant forwards, their hands still connected, and kissed him on the cheek. His whole face went red, having much more of a reaction than he'd had when she'd first kissed him on Heroes Day, but he soon found his voice. Can I kiss you back? Marinette stared at him, a little dumbfounded. She hadn't been expecting him to return the favour. Before she had any time to really consider it, though, she was already nodding her head, and Adrian was leaning in. With a hand not holding hers, he reached up and gently cupped her cheek, like she'd done to him back in the park. But before his lips could make contact, there was a loud banging on the elevator doors. He sprung back but didn't let go of Marinette's hand. Who is it? He called. Style Queen, was the response, and Adrian didn't hesitate in standing up, pulling Marinette with him, and he took her to the back of the elevator. He pressed her into the corner, as far as possible from the doors, and then stood in front of her. I won't let you hurt us, he shouted back, and Marinette stared at Adrian in adoration. He didn't know she was Ladybug and that she could protect herself, but it meant the world to her that he'd protect her like this. Her heart was still pounding from him almost kissing her, but then it started to pound for a different reason. There, above the elevator doors, were two eyes, watching her and Adrian. Someone had already been akumatized, so that had to be an amok. She really needed to transform and get the situation under control. The eyes seemed to vanish. Then they could hear Style Queen's heel boots making their way away from the elevator. She was leaving? But why? Marinette could think about that later. Right now, she had to transform, even if that meant revealing to Adrian she was Ladybug. Adrian, she started. but he whirled around and caught her off guard. "Are you okay?" he asked, squeezing the hand of hers he was still holding, and she nodded. "I'm fine, but I'm sorry, but I have to do this now. We have to get out of here. It's not safe for you. But you also can't ever tell anyone what you're about to see." Marinette narrowed her eyes. What was he? Plag! Close out! As Adrian transformed before her, the hand in hers getting covered in black leather, Marinette couldn't even make a sound. Her whole mouth had gone dry. Adrian was Cat Noir? Deep down, she knew it made sense. From what Alia had said, Adrian was often as absent as she was, but Cat Noir was flirty and cheeky. Adrian wasn't. Or was he? Now he was fully transformed before her, cat ears and all. It suddenly hit her that the way he'd asked about the kiss before had been very Cat Noir-like, but he didn't usually act like that around her, and in all fairness, she didn't often act very Ladybug-like around him either. A gasp nearly bubbled out of her mouth then. She was Ladybug. She wasn't supposed to know this. She couldn't know who Cat Noir was, not until all this was over. Adrian, what was she supposed to say, or do? The boy she loved was her crime-fighting partner. Oh God, the boy she loved. Cat Noir loved Ladybug. Adrian was in love with Ladybug. "I know this is a lot to take in, Adrian," Cat Noir said, seeing the look on her face. "We can talk about it later. Right now, I need to make sure you're safe." He pulled her towards the elevator doors and laid his other hand on them. Cataclysm! The metal dissolved into nothing, and after a cautionary glance left and right of the corridor, Cat Noir ran across it, Marinette in tow, and to the nearest cleaning closet, and he placed her inside. "Hide in here," he whispered, and Marinette was too shaken to argue. She went inside, but as Cat Noir let go of her hand and went to shut the door, she pushed it back open. "Be careful," she said. Marinette knew he rarely was, always sacrificing himself to save the day, to save her. Adrian loved her so much that it made her want to cry. "I will be." He took her hand in his again, and like he did back in the elevator, he cupped her jaw with the other, then leaned in and kissed her on the cheek. He left then, shutting the door behind them, and Marinette simply sunk down to the floor. She needed to transform. She knew that, but she also knew she was in no fit state to fight Style Queen after that revelation. Adrian, her kind and caring classmate, was the flirty Cat Noir who she had spent hours upon hours with, and he was in love with her, or not her, Ladybug, which was still her, but not her, and she loved Adrian, but not Cat Noir, even though they were the same person. Right now, she was just confused. How did she feel about Adrian now she knew he was Cat Noir? The answer came to her immediately. Love. She was in love with him. Adrian acted so differently around her as his alter ego because he was free from his father and all the expectations, and because he felt comfortable around Ladybug. She felt so honoured to have seen that side of him, not to mention all he'd done to protect her in Paris. Adrian was more wonderful than she'd dared to imagine. But how did he feel about her? He made his feelings for Ladybug clear. But to Adrian, Marinette was just a friend. But back in the elevator, he'd flirted with her, right? Her hand drifted up to her cheek, only just registering what had happened. Adrian had kissed her. She buried her face into her hands to stop herself from squealing. Was this a dream? "Marinette?" Tiki asked, and the teenager peeked through her fingers at the red Kwame in the dim room. "Are you okay?" she asked. The guardian shook her head and removed her hands from her face. "Adrian is..." Tiki smiled. "I saw. You knew, right?" "I have for a while." Marinette just nodded. "I'm not supposed to know." Tiki just giggled. "Well, you can't do anything about it now. Come on, you need to defeat Style Queen." Marinette took a few deep breaths and then stood up. Her Kwame was right. She could think about this later. Right now, she had to de-akumatize Chloe's mum. Although Marinette wasn't so sure how she could fight alongside Cat Noir, now she knew he was Adrian Agreste. Thankfully, with the Be Miraculous and the help of a senti-monster of Nino, they managed to save everyone, but as they headed back to school, all Marinette could think about was Adrian. He more often than not was the subject of her thoughts, but now it was so much more different. She replayed every moment she'd ever spent with Cat Noir, now seeing it all in a different light, and she couldn't help but feel incredibly guilty for rejecting him so many times. But Marinette knew she had been right to. Her feelings had been solely for Adrian. She couldn't have said yes to Cat Noir, but now she knew that the two boys were the same person, she found herself falling deeper in love with him. She wouldn't have wanted Cat Noir to be anyone else. When they arrived back at school, everyone trudged back up to their classroom after the ordeal they just endured, but Adrian gently pulled Marinette to one side in the courtyard. "Can I come by tonight?" he whispered. "I need to talk to you about..." He waved his hand with the ring on, and Marinette nodded. "Sure, but your father?" With a smirk, Adrian waved the Miraculous at her again, and Marinette smiled. He would leave his house tonight as Count Noir to see her. No one would ever know he'd left. That night, he visited as promised. Count Noir dropped down on her balcony where Marinette was waiting, and then a moment later, Adrian Agreste was standing in front of her. "Hi," he'd said, voice soft, and Marinette had just smiled at him as she blushed, hoping he couldn't see in the relative darkness. She had never imagined this would happen. Adrian Agreste visiting her in the middle of the night as Count Noir. She had thought it would be a one-time thing, though. It didn't turn out to be. That night, they'd just spoken about Marinette keeping his secrets, and Adrian had left within 10 minutes. But 3 nights later, he came back, asking for help with his French history homework. And then again, and again, and again. Sometimes they did homework, and sometimes they sat together on the chaise and watched a film with the volume down low, so they wouldn't wake Marinette's parents. She treasured those few hours spent together, away from the watchful eyes of their classmates, and all the pressure on them as Ladybug and Cat Noir. And slowly, she fell for him even more, finding herself getting progressively more and more comfortable around him, but also nervous. Marinette found it difficult for Adrian to be sweet and kind to her at school, but then flirt with her when she was Ladybug. He obviously didn't know she was the same person, but it messed with her head. She knew she loved him, whether he was Adrian or Cat Noir, but she didn't know how he felt about her. "Who did you get then?" Alia asked, bringing Marinette to the present. "I got Kim." "What am I supposed to get Kim?" Marinette grimaced, not due to the mention of Kim, but the reminder of who her secret Santa was. She knew Adrian a lot better now, but what was she supposed to get him? He had everything he wanted, apart from Ladybug. She sighed and simply handed the paper to Alia, and once her best friend saw the name written on it, she squealed, "Okay, lunch at yours to brainstorm ideas." Marinette just nodded, in no mood to argue. Of course, Alia was aware Adrian was Cat Noir too. Marinette knew she shouldn't have told her best friend, but Marinette had to tell someone he was Adrian. If he'd been anyone else in this city, she could have kept quiet, but not when he was the boy she loved. And to say Alia had been thrilled when she found out what happened in that elevator was an understatement. Marinette had practically had to restrain her best friend from marching up to Adrian and revealing Ladybug's identity so they could finally get together. And while Marinette wanted to be with Adrian, of course she did, she didn't think it would be a good idea. What if he only loved her because she was Ladybug? Her heart wouldn't be able to take it. For the rest of their morning classes, Marinette stared at the back of Adrian's head, her brain tricking her into thinking she could see those all too familiar black cat ears protruding from his blonde hair. To think she had saved Paris countless times with Adrian Agreste. Sometimes it just didn't feel real. It would have felt like a dream if it had not been for the ordeal that Shadow Moth was putting them through. As soon as the bell rang, Alia grabbed Marinette's hand and pulled her across the road to the bakery. And once they grabbed some food from the front counter, they went up to the kitchen. Laid out on the breakfast bar were dozens of Ladybug and Cat Noir shaped gingerbreads. They were being sold in the bakery for Christmas, and Marinette said she'd help decorate them. But she hadn't realised how popular they'd be when she'd offered. Her parents probably wanted this batch ready by morning, so she immediately sat down, grabbed the bag of black royal icing, and started on Cat Noir's suit. "You work too hard, girl," Alia said as she sat down opposite her friend, but Marinette just shrugged. "I promised my parents." And not just so you could pick out the perfect reference photo of Cat Noir to be able to ice him so well. Marinette looked up from the gingerbread cookie of her partner and glared at her best friend, but there was a pink blush on the Guardian's cheeks too. "You're hilarious." "Not as funny as Cat Noir though." Marinette sighed as she finished the suit outline and grabbed a Ladybug so she could ice on the spots. "I'm starting to wish I'd never told you." Alia just laughed. "Did you think about what you're going to get him?" she asked, referring to Adrian now, rather than Cat Noir, even though they both knew he was the same person. "Nope, and when am I going to have time now I have to do these?" Alia hummed. "Well, why don't you give those to him? One Ladybug, one Cat Noir. As good as they taste and look, doesn't seem like the greatest Christmas gift. Hey, Adrian, I care so much about you that the only thing I got you was these 2 gingerbread cookies that the whole city can buy." Alia laughed again. "I didn't mean like that. Give him 2 special ones. A Ladybug and Cat Noir. Without the masks." The black royal icing almost spurted out of the piping bag, and Marinette looked up at Alia with wide bluebell eyes. "Why?" she asked, but she already knew the answer. "What do you mean, why? Why do you think?" Marinette put the piping bag down. I don't think you need to know." She wrapped her arms around herself, squeezing her waist slightly. It's not something she hadn't considered before. During all those evenings spent together in her room or on her balcony, Marinette had almost revealed her identity more than once to Adrien, but every time she stopped herself. She hadn't been able to do it, and it was always for the same reason, because Adrien didn't love her. Of course, he loved Ladybug, and knowing that did make Marinette very happy, but it made her sad too. Ladybug was a huge part of who she was, but not all of her. Not that it was Adrien's fault for not knowing more about Ladybug. There were a lot of things they both kept hidden so people wouldn't find out who they were, but at the end of the day, Adrien only had feelings for a fraction of who she was. His feelings were for Ladybug, the saviour of Paris, not Marinette Dupencheng, the baker girl. She felt tears well up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She couldn't give Shadow Moth the slightest opportunity to akumatise her, but she couldn't lie and pretend it didn't make her sad either, and a moment later, Alia was stood beside her, her arms around her best friend. "Oh, Marinette, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you." Marinette shook her head. "Don't apologise. I upset myself. I want to. Ever since I got over the shock it was him, I've wanted to. But I won't be able to handle his rejection." Alia sat in the stool next to her best friend. "Rejection? What do you mean?" "Because he's in love with Ladybug." "You are Ladybug. He's in love with you." Marinette shook her head. "I'm nothing like her." "Girl, you are every inch Ladybug in and out of the costume. It doesn't always show through the same way. But she's there. It's the same with Adrien. Now I know he's Cat Noir, I can see all of his cheeky tendencies. I'd never have noticed before. And I'm sure he'll think the same when you tell him who you are." Marinette wrung her hands together beneath the breakfast bar. "What if he still rejects me though?" Alia shrugged. "I've no idea. But I doubt he will. You haven't seen the way he looks at you." The Guardian narrowed her eyes. "The way he looks at me? Who? Cat Noir?" Her best friend shook her head. "Adrien. If you're not there, he always looks worried, and when you arrive, like this morning, he only relaxes then." "Well, yeah, but that's just a friend thing." "I wasn't finished," Alia said. "It's not just like, oh, she's here, that's good. It's a finally, I can see her again. I missed her so much. When you walk in the room, he just comes alive. And have you seen the way he smiles at you? Oh my god, I wish Nino smiled at me like that. Not even Ivan smiles at Malene that way." Marinette found herself blushing a little. She had no idea about any of that. But when she and Adrien hung out together late at night, she had noticed how happy and relaxed and comfortable he seemed to be around her. "Really? Really? Well, none of that means he has feelings for me," Alia hummed. "No, maybe not. But there's something there. You can agree to that, right?" Marinette found herself nodding. It didn't point to him certainly having feelings for her, but it hinted at there being something deeper than friendship. And this way, if she revealed her identity to him, it would allow for Adrien to see if he truly loved Ladybug, since then he would know her completely. It might take a little time, but it had the potential of being worth it. After talking it over with Alia, it didn't seem like an outright abject disaster. "It's time to tell him," Alia continued. "He needs to know." Marinette nodded in agreement as she set aside a Ladybug and Cat Noir cookie to decorate for him. She was still apprehensive about it, but at the end of the day, this was Adrien Agreste. He was one of the sweetest people Marinette knew. Even if he didn't want her to be Ladybug, she knew he wouldn't be rude to her about it. He would still be as kind as ever, but she truly didn't know how she'd feel if after he found out her identity, he fell out of love with her. It was a blow Marinette was sure she could never recover from. As usual, Adrien had gone home for lunch, and, as usual, he was left alone in the dining room to eat. His father was too busy, Natalie was helping him, and his bodyguard was having a break. Although Adrien didn't mind so much these days, now he had Plag for company. As soon as the dining room door shut behind the teenage model, the black cat Kwame made himself known, and came out of Adrien's pocket with a huge smirk on his tiny face. "Why do you look like that?" Adrien asked. "It's kind of freaking me out." The Kwame's facial expression didn't change. "Have you read who you got for your Secret Santa yet?" Adrien shook his head. He had planned on doing it at home so no one would find out. "Why?" "I read it." The blonde sighed as he sat down at the table and reached for the small folded piece of paper that was still inside his pocket, but didn't open it. "You didn't doctor this, did you?" Plag rolled his eyes. "Does it look like I can write? The only thing these fair hands are made for is shoving cheese in my mouth. Yeah, makes sense." "Open it then!" Adrien narrowed his eyes. "You seem eager. You will be too once you open it." With a shrug, Adrien looked down at the piece of paper, and true to Plag's word, his whole demeanour changed the moment he saw whose name was written there. Marinette Dupencheng. A smile lit up Adrian's face and he leant back in his chair. For his first time playing Secret Santa, he had certainly got lucky with his pick. He couldn't have asked for anyone better than his lady. She had known he was Cat Noir for a few months now, but he had known she was Ladybug for a little longer than that. He had found out the day Zoe had started at DuPont. It was also the day she had been akumatized. Like now, he'd been at home for lunch, except by the time the akumatization had happened, he had already finished eating and had gone up to his room to play some video games before he had to go back to school. As much as he wanted to eat with his friends, there were some perks to being at home for lunch. Adrian had been minding his business, completely thrashing the AI opponent on Ultima Mecha Strike 3, when he heard the voice of Aquami. "Mr. Noir, are you able to help Paris? Ladybug is indisposed at the moment," Kalki said, hovering beside Adrian's head. Adrian hit pause and turned to face Kalki with a smile. "Of course." He trailed off as he felt his heart leap into his throat. The portal Kalki had come through hadn't closed yet, and through it, Adrian could see Marinette's bedroom. The portal snapped shut then, and the horse Kwami's eyes widened. She knew what Adrian had seen. "Mr. Noir," Kalki started, but Adrian just smiled. There was nothing Kalki could say to stop him from having seen the all-too-familiar pink interior of his classmate's bedroom, and he knew exactly what it meant. "Marinette's Ladybug," he whispered, a smile overcoming his face. "No, she's not," Kalki said, the panic clear in her voice, but Plag just sighed. "It's about time he found out. Maybe now he'll stop pining for her and finally ask her out so I can eat my cheese in peace." Usually, Adrian would have said something back to Plag, but instead, he just leant back on the couch and smiled. Marinette. She was his Ladybug, and he couldn't be any happier. She was kind and sweet and so amazing, and now he couldn't help but laugh at the memory of him calling her their everyday Ladybug. All those months ago, he'd been so close to the truth. He'd just been too blind to see it, but now it all made sense. Why hadn't he realised it was her sooner? Did he love Marinette though? Part of him had wondered before if when the time to reveal their identities came, what would happen if he didn't end up loving the girl beneath the mask just as much as he loved Ladybug. But as he transformed into Cat Noir and ran across the rooftops towards Soul Crusher, who was holding said girl, Adrian's heart was beating fast in his chest, and he knew it wasn't just from the adrenaline rush. In that moment, he knew he couldn't let anything bad happen to her, because he loved Marinette too. Deep down, it felt like he always had done. She had been his first real friend, and she'd always been there for him. He'd only pushed away the feelings he'd developed for her since that moment underneath the umbrella because of what he felt for Ladybug. No wonder he'd been confused all this time. It had been his first day of school, and he already had a crush on 2 girls. But now he just felt immense relief to know that they were one amazing person. And from that moment on, Adrian fell even harder for Marinette. Not long after Zoe had arrived in Paris, Chloe had predictably been akumatized again, but seeing Queen Banana hold a gun up to Ladybug had almost been too much for Adrian to bear. To think Marinette, who was so gentle and caring, had to go through this nightmare with him, made him so sad. He just wanted to protect her from Shadow Moth and everything he could try to do to hurt them. The quantum masking just seemed to stop working from that moment on. Every time he saw his lady, whether in person or on a poster around the city, he just saw Marinette, and his heart would immediately skip a beat. He was falling for her. Hard. But how did she feel about him? After a secretive conversation with Markov in the locker room, Adrian had it confirmed for him once and for all that Marinette was in love with him. But he didn't need Markov to tell him how Marinette felt about Cat Noir. Ladybug had told him more times than he'd cared to count that she didn't return his feelings. But instead of Adrian feeling sad about it for the 100th time, he just decided he needed to change her mind somehow, which was why he transformed in front of her in the elevator. He knew it had been a reckless thing to do. Even Plag had scolded him afterwards for doing it. But he didn't want there to be any confusion for Marinette between him and Cat Noir. He needed her to be able to see both sides to him, the calm and kind one, as well as the cheeky and flirty one, so she could decide if she loved all of him. And while Marinette looked like she'd been about to spontaneously combust when he'd revealed his identity to her, he was glad he had done it. She was still a blushing mess around him, meaning her feelings for Adrian hadn't faded since finding out he was Cat Noir. And further than that, Marinette had also seemed a lot more comfortable around him too. But that was also probably helped by the amount of time they were now spending together. He just couldn't stay away from her, no matter how hard he tried. He turned around in class and spoke to her whenever he had the opportunity. He always found excuses to linger after every Akuma fight. And on top of that, he visited her 3 or 4 times a week, and those were by far his favourite moments. Even if they didn't talk, just sat together and watched a movie, Adrian loved how comfortable being in silence with Marinette was. But he equally loved it when they talked too. He had learnt so much more about her than he ever knew before, and he loved her all the more for it. Of course, even though she knew he was Count Noir, and he knew she was Ladybug, Marinette wasn't aware that Adrian knew her identity. But with the way Ladybug had been starting to blush around Count Noir recently, Adrian thought that perhaps now was the right time to tell her that he knew she was Ladybug. "I'm going to tell her." "Tell her what?" Plag asked, not looking up from the cheese he was eating. "That I know she's Ladybug." The Kwami spent a solid 30 seconds choking on the piece of cheddar in his mouth, before he finally spat it out across the table and turned to look at Adrian. "That's a joke, right?" "No, that was gross," Adrian said. "Please don't spit your food out." Plag narrowed his eyes. "Not that! Telling Marinette!" "Well, why not?" the model asked as he finally began to eat. "Because what if Shadow Moth finds out your identities?" Adrian rolled his eyes. "He won't." "Why can't you just date Marinette without having to tell her you know she's Ladybug?" "Because it wouldn't be right. I'd be lying to her all the time, and she'd feel like she was lying to me too. We can't build a relationship on that. If I want our feelings to go somewhere, I have to tell her. And it can be my present for Secret Santa for her." But how would he tell her? It had to be something amazing for his lady. But it also had to be done somewhere quiet. Knowing Marinette, she'd probably start screaming. Somewhere quiet at school. The boiler room, perhaps? Mr. Haprel didn't mind them going in there. Nino had almost a whole office in there after all, and Adrian had fond memories of it too. The first time he'd been in there was when Mylène had been akumatized, and while he was sad she had got so upset that it had led to that, he was happy that he'd almost got to kiss Marinette because of it. Not to mention the other incident when Julica had been crying in there. He knew he should have been more concerned for his classmates. But Marinette had looked so beautiful. It was a miracle he didn't get distracted more by her. It was definitely for the best that she sat behind him in class. He continued to eat, thinking of what he was actually going to say in the boiler room to her as he did. Adrian did feel bad from keeping knowing who she was so long from her, but he did think it was for the best. She got so nervous around him sometimes. This extra time had allowed her to get more comfortable around him. Before he knew it, he was in the car and on the way back to school, and Adrian watched out of the window with a smile as the first snow of the year finally started to fall. He bet Marinette would look even more beautiful than usual with snow in her hair. The closer he got to school, the heavier the snow started to fall, and as Adrian ascended the steps, he doubted anyone would be in the courtyard. And he was right. It was empty save for 3 people: Marinette, Mark, and Nathaniel. They were stood by the science classroom, and the fairy lights Miss Mendeleev had begrudgingly let her class hang in the windows shone onto the 3 teenagers, creating the warm glow that Christmas lights made that Adrian liked so much. And true to what he'd imagined, Marinette did have snow in her hair, and she looked so pretty. But she really shouldn't be outside for too long when it was this cold, and she didn't have her scarf on either. He should get her inside. As he started to walk towards the group of 3 though, he could hear that the boys were arguing. "It's not my fault," Mark shouted, and Marinette held her hands out, trying to placate them. "I know it's not," she said, and Adrian came to stand beside her. "Is everything okay?" the model asked. Marinette sighed. "Not really," Nathaniel huffed. "He's making a big deal out of this. Look, the Christmas edition of our comic is coming out on Christmas Eve, which is next week. But I didn't like the story we had planned, so when I drew the panels, I changed it." "It's no big deal." "Except it is a big deal," Mark said. "I'm the writer, I'm in charge of the story, and by you changing the story in this comic, it has a knock-on effect on all the other parts of the comic that I've already planned out. And you did it without asking too." Tears filled the younger boy's eyes and Adrian frowned. He could understand why Mark would be upset about this. "Nathaniel, I really think you should apologise to Mark," Adrian said, but the red-haired boy just rolled his eyes. "No, it's not a big deal." Mark just shook his head and walked away, going into the science classroom. "It's obviously a big deal to him if he's getting this upset over it," Adrian said. "And do you remember when Mylène got akumatized?" Marinette said. "She didn't get akumatized because of a script change," Nathaniel replied. "It was Alia who got upset about that, and she didn't get akumatized over it. So Mark will be fine. He's overreacting." Mark poked his head out of the science classroom, none of them having noticed he hadn't shut the door behind him. "No, I'm not! Why are you being like this?" "Boys, shouting won't help resolve this," Marinette said. But neither of the boys seemed to hear her. "Because it's not a big deal," Nathaniel shouted back. "Just change the other scripts. Do you know how long that will take?" "Yeah, less time than it takes me to draw it. Writing takes no time at all. You barely do anything for our comic." Mark opened his mouth to shout back, but instead he just started to cry and slammed the door. "Nathaniel," Marinette said. "That was horrible." He shrugged. He'll get over it. Nathaniel shook his head and walked away, back off upstairs to the classroom, and Adrian sighed. I thought they were dating. Me too. But Nathaniel can be a little stubborn. I guess, Adrian acquiesced. Either way, you shouldn't be stood out in the cold, he said, taking one of Marinette's hands and gently guiding her as they were stood by the science classroom's door. From here, the top level of the school sheltered them from the falling snow, but it was still cold, and Adrian smiled when he saw that the tip of Marinette's nose had turned pink from the temperature. It's fine, she said, eyes focused on their joined hands. I don't want them to get acclimatized. You deserve a break. Adrian smiled. She was always so considerate of everyone. It's alright, I don't mind. It's my job. Although more acclimatizations means I get to spend less time with you. Marinette blushed. I like spending time with you too. The model's heart skipped a beat at the shy admission. Well, in that case, do you think I could come by tonight? Unless you got to sort out your Secret Santa present. Oh, no, I did it at lunchtime. Adrian smiled and swung their joined hands. Whoever you got must be very lucky. Her blush got worse. You too. So, what did you want to do tonight? Watch another film, he asked, and Marinette nodded. That's what they did the most of. Sit together on her chaise under a blanket and watch something. But before that, they'd always sneak into the kitchen and steal ice cream from the freezer, both of them trying not to giggle as they navigated their way through the dark room, and Adrian would lead Marinette by the hand back upstairs so she wouldn't fall. Adrian would always bring the film too. After his dad was acclimatized, she found out that he owned a lot of DVDs, but Adrian had confided in Marinette that he and his mum always watched them together, and now she was gone, he disliked watching them alone. Together, they'd seen about 20 movies, and while Marinette hadn't enjoyed them all, she loved getting to spend that time with Adrian. They'd giggle together quietly in the pink glow of her room, or hide behind the blanket together if something was too scary. Those moments were so precious to her. Her favourite moment was always when he arrived though. She'd wait for him out on her balcony, no matter the weather, and his clawed fingers would always gently, so gently, cup her cheek as he leant in to kiss her hello. She knew it was just a friendly thing, but she always hoped he meant more by it. Surely he had to have seen the way she blushed every time he did it. Even now, with their hands still linked, she was blushing. Adrian had to have realised she had feelings for him. Adrian smiled. I'll be around at 9 then. I'll bring a Christmas film for a change. It's been ages since I've seen one. Sounds good. Come on, let's get you in the classroom and out of the cold, Adrian said, guiding Marinette back out into the snow so they could go upstairs. He didn't let go of her hand until he had walked her back to her seat. He went to his own seat then, and Nino, who had his headphones on, lowered them back around his neck. Dude, you're blushing like crazy. Adrian just smiled. It's cold outside. Nino laughed, clearly not believing him, but Adrian didn't mind. He was beyond happy that Marinette felt this comfortable around him now, especially since it hadn't always been like that. And tomorrow he would finally reveal to her that he knew she was Ladybug. He wasn't sure how it would go. It might end in disaster, but if it did, he'd be able to make one last happy memory with her tonight when he went over to hers. But he truly hoped there would be many more to come.